We made it back. We're here with another AmeriCorps alumni on AmeriCorps Connections. Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, AmeriCorps Connections is where we have conversations with AmeriCorps alums. And we hear about their journey, about their service year. And then we also are just so excited to celebrate what they're up to now. My name's Nicki Fiacco, and I'm the brainchild behind this YouTube channel and the podcast. And it really came out of my obsession with podcasts, number one, and my pivotal and very transformative AmeriCorps year when I served with Volunteer Maryland. Shout out Volunteer Maryland. Um, Product placement, we're getting there. I served with Volunteer Maryland as an AmeriCorps member, and it really changed the trajectory of my life and my career and my understanding of service and giving back to the community, but also the really important skill of networking and making connections. And that's 100% what this podcast is about. I want to hear from as many AmeriCorps alumni as I can and connect you all with each other. So we have another excellent episode. I cannot wait for you all to meet this man that I am about to have this conversation with, who is an NCCC. I know we've had a run on NCCC alums, but it's all good. So I'm so happy to be here with Swim Karim, and let's just dive right into this. Oh, before we get started, shout out to Dan Medevere. Look what I have, Dan. It's a microphone. I know. Thank you, Dan, for helping me get this podcast spread far and wide, and for helping me with my audio and pretty soon some cool visual stuff that we'll do. So, Swim, let's just jump right in. How did you find out about AmeriCorps? Did you know what you were getting yourself into?
Well, it's super funny, Nicki. It's good to see you, and I'm glad you got your audience here on today's call and a video. It's really great. It's super funny. We talked last week, and I said, "Oh yeah, I was an NCCC member." And then I said, "You know what? I might need to go back and double check." It's because I was like, you know what? What are the actual differences? And so one of the things is I know what NCCC, you're traveling around. I was not a part of that.
Oh,
So
that's so funny.
I've already given you false information. I don't know why
Oh,
you've invited me here.
I need to be a fact checker.
Let me back up a little bit because my AmeriCorps experience is a little bit different, I think, than some. So I would be more considered under the Vista, but I was a part of this thing when I went to college in Asheville, North Carolina. I know we got a lot of people that went to App State. A lot of people in your world went to App State, and so shout out to the Mountaineers. And I was a part of a particular program at Warren Wilson College called the Bonner Scholar Foundation AmeriCorps one.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so I don't know if that falls more under the NCCC one. And so my insight was a little bit different compared to others that do like the full year and I did the traveling and things like that. But for me, a lot of the work I was doing was a little bit more at a home base, didn't really travel as much and did more during like the fall breaks, winter breaks, summer breaks. Trying to think, winter breaks. So that was what I did. Actually, I was a part of this network, and it's a network that continues to this day.
Yeah, I was gonna say you are officially I'm gonna have to fact check everything now, but I think officially you are our first Bonner Scholar AmeriCorps alum. And my 9 to 5 job that I work, we support higher education institutions in the Mid-Atlantic region, and yeah, we've interacted with some Bonner fellows as well. So way to go. I love NCCC. I love you all, but we broke it. Thank you. But I think I'm about to drop a podcast from an NCCC member. So, but anyways, that's fantastic. Let's talk about your experience. Apparently you did know what you're getting into, maybe.
Yeah, so this was back. I went to college in 2006, in August of 2006, and it was at that time where I became a Bonner Scholar, and it really started for me in high school. And I know we have a lot of people that are in the nonprofit space, Nicki, or that are kind of former AmeriCorps alum, like you like to say, 1.2 million strong, that just because they became in AmeriCorps, they ended up going and transitioning into the nonprofit space. But for me, it started really back when I was in high school. I had moved from Philadelphia, so I'm originally from Philadelphia, lived there till I was 13 years old. And then with my mom, relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm 13, I'm young, I'm in a new area, and I don't know anyone. And so I said, what are some ways that I have an opportunity to make connections in the community and meet people? Didn't really have a lot of money, didn't have a car, you don't have those things when you're adolescents at the age of, 13, 14 years old. And so
Yeah.
my mom worked at the hospital, I think it's the Carolina Medical Center, the CMC there in Charlotte. And one of the things she said is, over the summer, you can come hang out with us and you can volunteer at the hospital. And so one of the things I was doing at a very young age, at 14, I would push people, not very far, but they'd come off the elevator and it was a handoff. And so I would push people, maybe they just had a baby, maybe they had surgery, any number of things. And I'd take them from the elevator to their car and I push their wheelchair. And that was really my first introduction into the volunteer space. And it was something that really, it sounds cheesy and cliche, but it really sparked a joy in me because it gave me the
Hmm.
ability to make connections in a new community I didn't know. You feel good about yourself and you're doing some really good work in a local community. So from there, I did everything. Key Club, Junior Civitans. I was a junior docent for 2 summers at the Charlotte History Museum. So I would do tours, say, oh, this is Queen Elizabeth. A lot of people may not know Charlotte is the
Yeah.
Queen City, named after the Queen there. And so I would do tours in this museum. And it was just a really good way to not only give me joy, but give me give me insights into the area I was at. A lot
Hmm.
of knowledge was gained. Because again, this is in 2003,
Hmm.
2004. The internet isn't what it was today. So it's just a really good opportunity. So from there, when I went and I started applying to colleges, when I applied to Warren Wilson College, one of the things that came up was, hey, you could be a Bonner Scholar under the AmeriCorps designation. And so that's actually how I became a part of the alumni group. And that was in 2006, right after Hurricane Katrina. And as we know, a lot of AmeriCorps people were
Yeah.
doing work in that area.
Yeah. I wanted, and yes, and we're gonna so get there about like all of the work that was done in sorry, my thing just went crazy. Okay. Um two things, so many things, so much in that introduction. But something that you said that I've just been hearing over and over and over about how volunteerism connects you. It connects you to people that are different from you. It connects you from to people in your community, and it gives you a sense of purpose. And one of the things that I keep hearing over and over in just the information that I'm consuming is just how lonely our our current state of the US is. And we feel like there's so many people that feel unconnected and not connected and not purposeful and are don't necessarily have something that like they feel compelled to get up in the morning and do, whether it's your work or your family or whatever. And time again, like just the Surgeon General of the United States said that we have a pandemic of, or we have an epidemic of loneliness in the United
Mm.
States. And he literally said, service and volunteerism is a cure for that. And I need to write him a letter and be like, so there's this little agency you might want to know about in the federal government. And it's connecting people to purpose and meaning and service and opportunities. And how insightful and wonderful for your mom and then also you to realize at such a young age that you could make a difference. Like I've been on the other side of that wheelchair with that person pushing me out. One time I did it and I had it, well, twice, and I had a baby in my arm, right? I had a baby, a brand new baby in my arm. And I was like, oh my God, so like this is so important. And I just hope people can take from what you said that service, whether it's AmeriCorps or volunteerism, makes a difference. It just does. Like it connects you to people and places that you may never have thought to go. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh,
And then
absolutely.
yeah, so take it from here.
Yeah, and so that was when, again, 2006, right? Hurricane Katrina had just happened about a year beforehand, and as we know, America was still sending people to the Gulf Coast to kind of do a lot of work. And so one of the things in the summer of 2007, being under this Bonner Foundation AmeriCorps designation, we have to do a certain number of volunteer hours and volunteering in the summer. And we also do it in the school year as well. And so during the school year, we're in things like, I'm trying to think of some good examples. We're in school, like after school care clubs. Those are really big. Boys and girls clubs, as an example. So we're doing that type of work. We're doing trail maintenance is actually a really big one that I was doing. So we're doing about 5 hours a week through all the entire school year. But then come the summer, you're asked to do a certain amount of money because, if you're going to get that at end of the year money in terms of education and grants, which I use for my college student loans and help pay down the debt immediately. In order to get that, you have to do a certain amount. And I think it's like, I'm not even going to give you a number. I was going to say 800, but I don't even know if that even adds up
Yeah.
to more or less. And so one of the big experiences during the summer of 2007, and even before then, doing single week trips was going down to New Orleans. And so I went
Mm.
down to New Orleans in the fall of 2006. I went in the winter of 2006/7. I went in the spring of 2007, and then I went in the summer for 2 months of 2007. And so
Wow.
there were still a lot of AmeriCorps Vistas down there. There were still a lot of AmeriCorps NCCC members down there. So that was where I really start to get a greater sense of the alumni group, Nicki.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
traditional people, if you're in Triple C in Eastern Washington, or if you're in the Detroit area, like Kate Morton, one of your former guests was
Yeah.
saying, you're surrounded by it. But where I was in rural Appalachia, North Carolina, I didn't see a whole lot of AmeriCorps members on the regular. So it was definitely one of those things, being down in Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, even in places like Tuscaloosa, Alabama, you'd see a lot of AmeriCorps members. And that was the first time I really started to see the weight and the size of the AmeriCorps alumni group.
Yeah, 100%. I was talking to somebody the other day about my, I was an AmeriCorps member, right? So I had that AmeriCorps experience, but then I worked in Volunteer Maryland as a director. So I had that bigger programmatic view of like, oh, like we're spanned all across the state of Maryland, and we have 30, cohorts that have gone through here. Where did all these people go? Who are they? What are they doing now? And then when I went up to the commission level, that really 30,000, 40, 50,000 foot view of like the national service landscape across our country and in our territories of Guam and Puerto Rico and in DC, and the connections with the commissions and the AmeriCorps members, that's when I was like, holy crap, there's a lot of us in all different silos. And there's got to be a way for us to have a grander conversation and connect people who have had NCCC, Teach for America, City Year, all of those different
Mm.
experiences where people connect more with the program that they came through, and not so much the big AmeriCorps 75,000 or 200,000 AmeriCorps members that serve annually. Like there's a million of us. And I will just say, I'm going to double down on the AmeriCorps connections, and I'm going to challenge people to, in your everyday, like at least once a month, you're going to run into somebody who did AmeriCorps. Like
Oh yeah.
wear your vintage gear, go out with a t-shirt, see what happens. I think Dana even mentioned
Oh.
wearing her gear. And somebody will say to you, "Did you serve in AmeriCorps?" And we're everywhere. So yeah, and I love that you had the experience from your program to understand like NCCC and Vista and all the different streams.
Well, look, I think you have an idea right here. You got to start selling alumni T-shirts, scarves,
We're
and so
getting
then I
there.
can so then I can just walk around and be like, "Oh, this pen, I got it from Nicki. No big deal."
No, I love that. AmeriCorps connections. AmeriCorps connections. We'll get there. We've got
Mhm.
some people working on things, so we'll see what happens. But I appreciate that. So what kind of work were you doing when you went to all these different places?
Yeah, again, during the year time, it was a lot of the things that you would imagine. Like I said, working in after school programs was a really big one. Working with food banks was really
Uh,
big. Depending on the time of the year, if it's the holidays, you were doing a lot of that. And then one of the best things I really appreciated about the program was the introduction to nonprofits, because sometimes they would go to the service learning center of the organization of the college, and they say, hey, we're looking for some volunteers to help me in X, Y, and Z. Is that a possibility? And so it's like, yeah, we have a whole department that leads those particular efforts. So I had the ability to do work with the
mhm.
likes of Western North Carolina AIDS Project, did work with them. Autism Society of North Carolina, did work with them. Manna Food Bank, which is part of the Greatest Second Harvest nonprofit entity that's across the nation. So just a lot of good introductions with nonprofits. But the big thing that I was doing, at least in New Orleans, was a lot of gutting. And
Mm,
I know, I think I listened to one of your previous episodes and someone was saying that they were doing a lot of paperwork. So they were having the
yeah.
clients that would give them paperwork and they were filing through that. So since we were coming around a little bit later after the fact, one of the things that we would do is we were living in the lower Ninth Ward. I'd never forget it. We were on Ninth and Independence, right on the corner, caddy corner to elementary, maybe middle school, one of the two. I know it wasn't a high school. And you could see the levees from the house. I mean, it was really just that close.
Wow.
And one of the things, living in the area for 2 months, we were just living in a house, funny enough. And so we're living in a house. It's like 6 of us in this particular house. And one of the things that you really begin to appreciate is that there'll be community members that say, hey, you all are with that group doing stuff in the neighborhood. And so before long, people start to know who you are. And
Hmm.
so we were doing a lot of gutting, going into people's homes. And if they still had products or still had items in their house, removing those items because it's labor intensive. And so you've got
Yeah.
a bunch of 19, 18, 20-year olds, they're eating uh, ding dongs and McDonald's all day, so we don't know anything from anything. We're just young or energetic and we're willing to help. And so you're going into people's homes, you're removing those couches, things that maybe they just weren't able to get out. Because, if you're 65 plus, if you're 55 plus, you might not have the energy or the network to help you. So we were doing a
Hmm.
lot of that, along with working in a lot of summer programs as well.
Yeah. Working down there during the summer, moving stuff around. I bet it was sweltering.
You
My
lose
goodness.
so much sweat. It's seriously like, that was the skinniest I've ever been, because you're just constantly sweating and
Yeah.
working and moving. So yeah, you got it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But so rewarding and so important that this work has to take place. And I love what you said about being introduced to nonprofits, because that was also my experience, right? Like, I was working in a park and we were getting volunteers from all over the place, and, just coordinating and reaching out to different organizations that could come in and help and provide, we weren't doing anything. We were doing environmental education programs, but really getting to understand, like, all of the different organizations throughout the county that I worked in. Was your experience with interacting with those nonprofits, do you think that that was a direct correlation and linkage to what you're doing now?
100%. I mean, that's just the short answer. 100%. Like with anything, as you get deeper and deeper into particular structures, and for me, my interest in structures of the nonprofit space and the differences between them, there's just no doubt about it. AmeriCorps really put me in a position of really understanding some of the most immediate needs of nonprofit organizations, some of the things that can be put to the side, some of the leader structures that you
Yep.
see, some of the ways that these organizations work in the community, or some of the ways these organizations don't work in the community. I think we have this sense that a lot of nonprofits are really out there touching clients and interacting with clients, and that's not always the case. There are a lot of, as we know, foundations that are more financial backers. We know there are a lot of organizations that provide resources or research. I know we got a lot of data fiends out there. And so, like, there's a lot of nonprofits
Yeah.
that do a lot of things. And so for me, it was really the culmination of because I did it for 2 years. It was a combination of those 2 years under this Bonner AmeriCorps setup that really set me up in a really good way to really understanding the space that is working within nonprofit and various charities.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it opens up so many doors, and, you could go down so many different avenues. Like, I like what you said about not every AmeriCorps member goes down the nonprofit route, but it's the proximity that we're in. So a lot of us end up that way. But there's also corporate social responsibility. And like you said, data and research, because now more than ever, and this, that, this, like, certain interventions need to be data driven and they need to be data rich. And so nonprofits and other organizations are looking in and working in that space.
Yeah, and it's how many of us, if you're listening to this, how many of us have applied for a job? And one of the questions that tends to come up is, have you done any type of military service? Have you done any type of AmeriCorps service? And you're able to check that box. I think there are a lot of nonprofits that really are able to utilize the
Mm,
AmeriCorps network as a pipeline of not only just high-end talent, but high-end ideas and action points. And so
yeah.
I know there are a lot of organizations that are out there that really rely on the AmeriCorps network, not just in terms of getting labor, right? That's the big part.
Mhm.
We know what it is, right? You get some quality people that are able to come in, but the exchange of ideas, being connected with generally young people. And like we know that you can be of all ages and do AmeriCorps, but we know a large percentage tend to be between ages of 18 and 24 years old. And so there's a lot of energy that comes when you have that type of demographic under your house. And so absolutely, there's just so many benefits to society as a whole here in the United States of having an AmeriCorps program. It just reverberates like a stone hitting water.
I love that. Oh, what a good visual. And the program that I served in and then I was director for, it was an intergenerational program. And I love to see the interaction. I mean, we had an AmeriCorps member who did Vista for like 5 years, and then she did AmeriCorps for like 2 or 3 years. Like she was a lifelong, like, um, AmeriCorps person. And she was celebrated her 70th birthday during her service year. And it was just really exciting. Like I love to see how um the AmeriCorps members from, the younger AmeriCorps members in their 20s and early 30s just lean into her like sage experience on this planet and what she was doing. She was serving at a senior center, and she was serving seniors as a senior herself. I mean, it was just like when you're talking about like ideas. I mean, anybody, yeah, I know, like mad love. I would give her a shout out. She probably wouldn't mind, but I need to check with people before I start just giving people's names out. But absolutely. And you've got that passing back and forth about ideas, and you have people. And one of the things that like with AmeriCorps, like you said, the resiliency, I think, of AmeriCorps members. Like if you can make it through a service year, and some is are more challenging than others. Some come with financial struggles, some come with relationship struggles and whatever. But if you can make it through a service year and you're committed to that, you're a type of person, right?
Mhm.
You're a type of person.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's not, I always just say it's not for everyone. And it's not for everyone in the same way that going to college is not for
Hmm.
everyone. It's not for everyone in the same way of fixing your car. I've recently had some coolant troubles with my car, and I'm like, I could look this up online. And if I was being honest, I could get a jack for my car. I could lift it. I could probably fix this. It's just not for me, Nikki. It's just not for me.
Outsource.
It's right. So for those that are interested in and they go through the AmeriCorps year, I think it can be very beneficial. Not to say that everyone, and you've mentioned this before, not to say that everyone's going to walk away absolutely loving it. But if you're able to give some good time, really take a look at it. And one of the great things is you can do that pretty much any time in your life, which is
Yeah,
really, really
yeah, it is. There's opportunities for everyone.
amazing.
All right, let's take a little swing here about like what are you up to now? I know you have a couple different things happening in your life. There's some things that like I know that you want to talk, I want you to talk about. But I want to segue into either like what you're doing now or what you want our viewers, the AmeriCorps Connections Network, to know about you.
I always like to say the one thing I'm still doing to this day is volunteering. I work and operate in the nonprofit space, so I get paid in that particular place working with larger nonprofits and all of that jazz. But on my day to day, I still volunteer. It's something that has, I always like to say in the nonprofit space, I love the money because it excites my brain, but I love volunteering because it warms my heart. There's
Oh,
just so many opportunities to this day to be able to really know the people that are around you based off of volunteering. And so even to this day, Nikki, I'm still volunteering. There's a bus stop. Live in Albuquerque. We have an adopt a bus stop. And so I have a son,
cool.
he's 7, he's going to return 8 here in December. We've adopted this bus stop. And so if you go to the bus stop, this is our bus stop. And so we're charged with cleaning it and taking care of it. And it's nothing, anything, it's nothing too crazy, but stay volunteering is something that I always like to say I'm doing, because I want to encourage other people to be able to keep doing it. I think it's just great. The big thing I'm working on these days, like you, a podcast. So I actually have a podcast called the Nonprofit Insider Podcast. I like to say we give a little bit more of a commentary feel to some of the things that are happening in the nonprofit space. So whenever we're talking about AmeriCorps and how so many nonprofits rely on it, I like to talk about nonprofits as a whole and the structures and the insights and the rules that come with that, and giving some commentary, because as you know, 10% of all people in the United States work in the nonprofit sector.
Wow. Really? 10?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Officially getting paychecks, and that now, of course, we're all volunteering. You've mentioned before, if you volunteer at your kids' local event, you're a volunteer, but 10% of people get paychecks and get paid in the nonprofit sector as NGOs and things.
Wow. So what are some either recent or compelling conversations that you've had, and do you have guests on your show, or is it just swims like
Generally
brain?
no Generally no guests.
Oh,
Yeah. Well,
interesting. I don't
I've
think
had
my podcast would fail if it was just me talking.
What you probably, and
So,
listen, let's be honest, you probably got the numbers to back it. You've got a large network. I mean, you've got 6, 7, 9 months worth of people listening. So I know your numbers are just jazzed here. But no guess. I had my very first guest after 23 episodes. I had my very first guest on for 15 minutes. But no, I don't do guests. And it's just by design, because it gives me an opportunity to really share some of my insights and some of my thoughts on this particular world. So one of the things, and I'm glad you asked this question, because listen, we could nerd
let's
out forever on this.
let's
I
go
always
there.
like to say a lot of people don't actually know what a nonprofit is.
Mm,
And so if you go to an average person, you say, hey, what's a nonprofit? Not that this is a test. We're not doing, Yale, quizzes or anything
right.
like that. This isn't the University of Maryland here. But if I said, if you had to describe what a nonprofit is, I think a lot of people's answers would be very different. So, Nicki, I'm going to ask you. This is your podcast, so I
Oh
got to
God.
ask. I'm putting you on the spot for your audience. How would you define a nonprofit?
So it's my understanding that it's just a tax designation, and a 501c3 is, and if I come across as stupid, I'm totally
Oh.
editing this out. No, I'm just kidding. It's my understanding that a 501c3 is a nonprofit because they don't carry over, or they don't generate like shares and revenue for boards or something along those lines. Like they're not a revenue generating organization. But I know there's nonprofits like the one that I work for, where we have memberships and we charge and we do have revenue that comes in. So I don't know. It's my understanding that it's a tax designation and it's based off of not ending the year. Oh, now I'm going to totally edit
Uh-oh.
this out.
Uh-oh. Okay, well, listen, let me start off by saying this thing.
Was I close?
Let me tell the audience this by starting off. Not a lawyer. So that's a big thing, because there are a lot of people that are lawyers. There are a lot of people that are true experts in this particular space that are even more advanced than I am. So I always like to throw that out. But you've got the first part right. And it's really the tax designation is the big thing. And so what a lot of people may not realize is that the IRS is the group that determines what a nonprofit is. A lot of people are kind of sort of familiar with that. But the IRS actually has 29 designations of 501c status.
Hmm.
Most people are familiar with a 501c3, but there are 29 different structures and setups that constitutes a 501c. And so this is by the IRS. And so you could put this in your show notes for the people that are listening. Type this in right now on Google. Look up IRS publication 557, 557, and you can kind of get a nice sense of what they are. And so again, most people are familiar with a 501c3, but I took my notes here. I'm looking here. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. But in this publication, it's a 76-page document. Of this document, it'll talk about these 29 different 501c organizations, And out of this 76 document, 50% of it is about 501c3s
Okay.
specifically. And so here I'll give you, just so people are like, well, what are some swim? What are some other examples of a 501c organization? So you have a 501c13. Most people haven't heard about that. That is a nonprofit organization that is a cemetery company. So, for example, if let's say a lot of people are familiar with the Kennedys as a family. I don't know if they have one of these, but they're very well known. So they might have their own, for example, private cemetery. And so they can have a piece of land. They don't pay federal taxes on it, designate it as a 501c13, and then they don't have to pay federal taxes on that, and they are able to do contributions. A 501c14, a lot of people haven't heard about that. That's a state chartered credit union. So, for example, I know you, Nicki, you live in Maryland. And so, for example, they have out there the State Employees Credit Union. You may have heard of it. That is
Yeah.
actually a nonprofit under the 501c14 designation. So they have $600 million on their books and $4.7 billion in assets. They are able to skirt around federal taxes because of this designation. Let me give you
Okay.
another one. A
We are
501.
so getting, this is amazing. Continue.
Okay, here's another one. This is the very, very first one. A 501c1.
One.
Most people aren't as familiar with that. That's a corporation organization designated by Congress. The most common example of that is a federal credit union. And so, for example, you have a federal credit union would be like Kirkland Credit Union. So that's different than a state credit union like the State Employees Credit Union of Maryland. Kirkland is a federal credit union. So if I'm living in California, I can't be a part of that Maryland. I could be a part of that
Right.
Maryland one, but I have to have some type of connection to the state. So there's a whole bunch of different 501c designations, 501c4, of course, talking social welfares. I was just looking up the other day, one of my favorite ones. Let's see if I have it here. A 501, I think it's a 501c5. I live in New
Okay.
Mexico. So we have a lot of people. That is a 501c5 is a labor, agricultural, or horticultural organization. And so a prime example of that would be like a rodeo. So if you're ever in the countries of Maryland and you have a rodeo and they are a nonprofit organization, because that promotes the welfare and the general knowledge of humans and plants. So something like, here's an example, something like the United Auto Workers, they're a nonprofit, but they're not a 501c5. They are a 501c3 because they deal with humans versus plants and animals. So the IRS is the overarching aspect of what a nonprofit is. And there's a lot of different ways you can break this down.
I'm speechless. That was like such an information dump that like I feel like we're gonna need to do a follow-up, or we're gonna have to do like a mastermind class or some series of like that was I had no idea. I knew about like the something B Corps, but they weren't that's not a 501c3. That's like a company that um the greater good is the mission of the organization, and
Mm-hmm.
they still can carry over profit and do some other things. But that's fascinating. I Okay, so what's the name of your podcast? Did you say it already?
The Nonprofit Insider Podcast. And listen, Nicki, I
Okay.
can nerd out forever on this. Let me give you just one more here, because I think a lot of people would be very interested in this. One of the things that a lot of people may not realize is, with all these different 29 nonprofit organizations, a lot of people will say, I want to donate to an organization for tax purposes. And so you had mentioned, like, at the end of the year, the nonprofit can't basically enter money or can't roll over money. That's a little bit of a misinformation from the general public, not by anyone's fault. Nonprofits are able to take, you can have revenue, memberships, you can bring in money, but it
Hmm.
can't go to an individual or group of individual
Right.
stockholders, owners. We know that type of stuff. But you can roll that money over year after year. That's no problem at all. And we would consider like almost like you have profit, so you roll it over. One of
Hmm.
the prime examples I always like to use is St. Jude's. They're based out of that general area of but Nashville, Denver. I think they probably have operations in Maryland. We
Hmm.
know they do a lot of commercials. One of the things with the St. Jude's, and it's a criticism to them to a degree, but it's not always a bad thing. So I'm not picking on them by any means. I don't need any St. Jude's people coming to me. But if St. Jude's were to stop fundraising right now, if they said, you know what, we're done, we're going to disband this organization, they have enough money in their reserves for the next 5 years.
Okay.
A lot of nonprofits will have enough money for 1 to 3 years. Some
Right.
biggers will have closer to 3 years as an average. But
Hmm.
big nonprofits, they can have so much money, they can stop fundraising right now and they be able to use that money for the next 60 months, like a car loan with no problem. So
Wow.
I always like to say there's a lot of money in the nonprofit space, and a lot of the rules that the IRS has set up as it relates to contributions and things can be very advantageous.
Knowledge bomb happening on the AmeriCorps Connections podcast right now. That was amazing. So what is your overall like purpose and mission for your nonprofit insider podcast? Is it
two,
go ahead.
I'll say two things immediately. The first is just providing, again, just a commentary on what's happening. One of the things I think there's a lot of myths that happen in the nonprofit space. And I think one of the biggest myths, and I think sometimes the nonprofit industry kind of gets in their own way and stumbles on their own feet, is the utilization of the mission. And
Mm,
so I think a lot of people, and I'm sure you've had this at times, Nicki, when you say you work with a nonprofit or you volunteer a nonprofit, you're on the board of a nonprofit, people can kind of get rose colored glasses in their eyes.
mm.
Oh my God, you're a hero. Oh, you're doing such amazing work. But what a lot of people may not realize that are not the 90%. And here's a side up 10% of all people work in nonprofit, 8% of all people work in government. The
Mm,
remaining percentages of people in the United States work generally in for profit, whether they
mhm,
work in construction or telecommunications or anything like that. So you're talking almost what 82% of all Americans work in a for profit particular space. So there's a lot of aspects to being in the nonprofit space that you and I may know, but a
mhm.
lot of people on the outside may not know. So giving a general commentary so that people know it's not all fun and it's not all smiles. There's a lot of bullshit that exists in the
Yeah.
nonprofit space. And so being able to share those aspects so people can kind of get a deeper reality and relating to the audience in that particular space. That's one of my big goals. And one of my second goals is really to just provide a voice to the nonprofit world, to get insights. And this is just something that I really love and appreciate. And so being able to share that knowledge just in general, like with the 501c structure, giving some facts and giving some opinions.
That's amazing. And so people can just use it as a resource to understand the nonprofit field better and just get, well, I was going to get some insider, that's the name of the podcast, some insider information. Uh, and you're right. Like, um, it's nonprofit. Yes. A lot of nonprofits are giving back. And like you said, some of them are touching the people. Some of them are not, they're doing research, right? Institutions, foundations, giving out money. Um, but what was my point? Oh, but it's a business,
Yeah.
right? Like the bottom line is you still have books you got to keep, you still have taxes you got to, it's still a business and there's still a strategy behind it. And I would also say that like if anybody's interested in like starting a nonprofit or doing something like that, like just look to see if maybe there's a nonprofit doing the thing that you want to start a nonprofit for and maybe like support that nonprofit in some way, shape, or form because there's a lot of duplication. I don't know if you talk about that in your podcast, but it seems like there's a little bit of duplication of work and there is an ability for nonprofits to come together and do more partnership work. And that's also just I think with the work with AmeriCorps, right? Like where some nonprofits and organizations rely on the AmeriCorps member to do the work, the Vista members to build the capacity, the NCCC members to move the trees, or build the trails, and the TFA members to get in the classroom and do the teaching, and City Year to do the tutoring, and then all of the in betweens. Um, there's still there's that's such an example of partnerships, right? Like the nonprofits are partnering with schools. The nonprofits are working with AmeriCorps. Sometimes the schools are partnering with AmeriCorps and then partnering out with the nonprofits. So there is this ecosystem uh, that AmeriCorps fits right into that.
Mhm. Absolutely. And one of my favorite things, see, like I don't know, yeah, why'd you invite me here? Because I'm just plugging now. But
Plug.
one of my favorite parts, Nikki, of doing the podcast, we have a reoccurring segment called the non-profit horror story.
Okay.
And so not every episode, but during about once every 2 to 3 episode, I have people from across the nation. We've had people from North Carolina, Colorado, Arizona, California that send me stories, and I read those stories on the show. And there are stories
Mm,
that really show the more realistic aspects
yep.
of being in a nonprofit space. Because listen, in the same way that if you work at I'm, I'm going to pick if you work at AT&T and you're in the break room and someone decides they put yesterday's salmon in the microwave. It happens in it. Listen, it happens in the nonprofit space, and some
Yeah.
of the stories are just so relatable because you've experienced it, you've been in this space, and as much as we know, we're dealing with fundraisers and boards and all the things like that. I had a story from someone just the other day. This is an exclusive, Nick. I haven't even shared this story yet.
Oh, this is
I had a,
exciting.
I had a, let me ask you a question. When is the first time, Nikki, you've ever had chips and salsa?
Oh gosh. Well, I grew up in Southern California, so I think it was kind of a staple. But when I first remembered, and actually my dad is visiting me from from California, so I could actually ask him, he might remember. Chips and salsa, I think I would have to say maybe maybe middle school is when I remember like that good pico de gallo, and it's not like
Ooh,
that. The one that has like I don't like the salsa that has like the tomato base. I like
okay.
pico de gallo with the cut up. Okay, now we're gonna go now the AmeriCorps food podcast.
Yes,
Okay, so
subdivision.
we'll just say we'll say middle school. That was my first experience with chips and salsa. We had Carlos Murphy's. Oh, okay. My memory's crap, so who knows?
We got to get a sponsorship from Carlos Movie. Well, the reason why I asked is because the first time I ever had chips and salsa, I was 18 years old, and it was because I was in AmeriCorps, and I remember sitting. It was like maybe 2 months in, and someone brought out a bowl of chips and a bowl of red stuff, and I said, "What is that?" And people started taking the chips, and I'll be honest, growing up in Philadelphia, I'd never seen it. And so I've been asking some people, and I happened to mention this to someone that's in the nonprofit space. And she told me a story that one time she was at an event and they had chips and salsa. And a couple minutes had passed, like half an hour, 45 minutes. And one of the volunteers took one of the chips, they dipped
Double
it in,
dipped.
they took a bite, and they put the chip back in the salsa. Now, Nikki, they double dipped. They double dipped. That is
That
a
is
listen. We talk about again. We don't have enough money for funding. We got a leak in the building. But this person was talking about how being in the nonprofit space for 10 years, this story stood out to them as a horror story because they could not believe the volunteer had double dipped the
double
chips.
dipped.
Even
That
I
is
know not to double dip. And so those are the type of stories I like to bring to the forefront because I think
yeah.
it's something that it's relatable. It really brings out, oh my gosh, like these horror stories are not always bad. Sometimes you just have people that double dip.
I love that. That is so great. So good. I am going to be a fan of your podcast. So I am going to have to listen to it. I've got some car rides coming up here soon, so I'm definitely going to the Nonprofit Insider by Swim Karim. I'm so excited to hopefully my network will be all over it. If you are listening and learning about this podcast for the first time from AmeriCorps Connections, please give me a shout out and just say, "Hey, I found your podcast from here." It'll just be really cool to see how the different networks interact with each other. And yeah, is there anything else that you want to share? Or I know, like, I don't know. I would love to have you back for another time where we could actually like be like, this is the topic we're talking about. But you're a busy guy, so we'll figure it out. Um, is there anything that are just I'll ask my big question after I ask this. Is there anything else that you want to share or want people to know or follow or whatever with what you're doing now?
That I want to share. Yeah, feel free to listen to the Nonprofit Insider podcast. We've got some great stories. We always like to do it in 3 segments. We have a new segment for the first 5 minutes. I get into like a little bit of a main segment for about 10 minutes. That's usually where I'm ranting about work from home policies, or I'm ranting about any number of things that are happening. And then in the third segment, we'll usually have our nonprofit horror stories. We do book reviews. I actually just got finished doing a really nice book review. I Said What I Said, an analogy of Black women in nonprofits. So I do like to do a lot of reading. So just listen to the podcast. We've got
Okay.
it on Apple. We've got it on Spotify. But I want to nerd out for just one more minute here, Nicki.
Do
I
it.
want to actually read a piece from the IRS's 557 publication about specifically 501c3. Because again, there's
Do it.
29 different 501c organizations. Only 8 of them even allow donation contributions. And so that's one of the big things is if you want to donate, you want to maybe use it for tax purposes. You know how that can be. And
Yeah.
so I want to read this. This is actually, you can find this on page 22 of that 557.
I'm
And
sure
so
it's super compelling because it was written by the IRS.
well, it actually is because it really
Okay.
does break down what a 501c3 is. And it has, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. But at the very onset, it says an organization may qualify for exemption from federal income tax under the 501c3 if it is an organized and operated exclusively for one or more of the following purposes.
Mm.
One, religious. So we know that's why churches are nonprofits. 2, charitable. I always like to give an example of the Sierra Club. A lot of people may not realize that the Sierra Club is a 501c4, but they also have a foundation, which is a 501c3. And so they use that 501c3 as a charitable wing. So in terms of doing scholarships for young people, things like that, that's one. So you have number 1, religious; 2, charitable; 3, scientific;
Mm.
4, testing for public safety; 5, literacy; 6, education. We know that's a big one. We know education is a big one. 7, the fostering of national or international amateur sports competition. That is legit. One of the reasons why you can have
NFL.
You've got it. Actually, if you look at it, football is specifically listed as you could do Control F, and you can see why the NFL is listed as a nonprofit. And then number 8, anything that is the prevention of cruelty to animals or children. So that's when you start talking organizations like PETA and those types of things. So those are the 8 designations, and there's of course subdivisions that can kind of occur, but those are the things that really constitute what a 501c3. So next time you're in a board meeting or anything like that, you can kind of, your audience can give them a little bit of knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. That was so helpful. Oh my gosh. Like I could I love that we can connect, and this is the purpose, like the reason for this podcast. Connecting through AmeriCorps, but then also sharing the resources and the wisdom of AmeriCorps members. Like we're not like we went through AmeriCorps. In your case, you did it intentionally. In my case, I fell into it and it changed my world. But we are more than our AmeriCorps service year. We are people who have gone on to do professional things, and we have interests, and we have, whatever hobbies that are important. Like Sade Harris, who now builds terrariums. She was an AmeriCorps alum. She also can put on project and teach you how to build a terrarium for your home. I mean, like that's one of the things that I love about, yeah, she was podcast number 7 or something, or 8. So the information that you shared is good. I feel like it's going to be super helpful for the audience, and it's just another example of AmeriCorps members who have gone on to either further their interests or just give back with resources. So I always like to end the podcast with asking, there's 1.3. I was just at an event at Serve
Hey,
DC with current AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps alum, and CEO Michael
Michael
Smith.
Smith.
Michael Smith
Yes.
was there, and he said that officially there's 1.3 alumni, AmeriCorps alumni. So we're going to have to change my show notes to 1.3. Um, so there's a lot of us out there, right? Like what would you want to see for the network? Like what do you think we could do, big, small, nationally, regionally, locally, conscious wise, anything? What do you think we could do?
Yeah, I thought about this question because again, I stalked your podcast and listened to every episode I could, and so I appreciate again, Nicki, the time to be able to hop on and talk to your audience. We've got a good network, and you've got a good thing going here, so I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
One of the things is when I was in AmeriCorps, one, I didn't even really know what I was getting into, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
But this was back in 2006. And so when I got out, this was 2008. And so MySpace was really still the thing. Facebook was
Uh,
really just getting started. And so being able to get to a network for self services, even just to like get a job after college, that would have been nice. So I definitely would love to see a bigger network, and especially with this next generation that as they finish out their year, they're automatically put into some type of network where they
yeah.
have the ability to connect. But for the general population of AmeriCorps, I would actually love to see a conference. I would love to see you at the forefront, Nicki, of doing an AmeriCorps alumni conference, bringing people together from around the nation that have been a part of the AmeriCorps space, and getting AmeriCorps at the federal level involved in some fashion. Because I think you said 1.3 million. There's just no reason that we aren't even more connected and able to bond, like if you were in a college alumni network.
That's amazing. Like, and there may or may not be something interesting happening in 2024. I'll just say that. We'll be in touch
Whoa,
off the air.
teaser. Okay, I'm not gonna say no more.
Total
Wow.
teaser, total teaser. But I love that. And you know what? You're not the first person that I've interviewed that has said that. Like bring us together. Let's do this thing. So yeah, I think we all want to get connected and we want to know more about each other. So this was so amazing. And I'm serious. I would love to have you back on for another episode or something special. If you haven't already, I'm sure people have already left this podcast and gone and listened to your podcast. So if you've made it this long, thank you so much. I'll be back next week with another AmeriCorps Connections. And Swim, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. And I think you reached out to me on LinkedIn or I commented on something. So